Meria. Meria has provided independent news for a smart audience for over 13 years now on the Meria Heller Show, available at Meria.net.
Meria.net.
And now, here is your host, the mouth that roars, Meria Heller.
Good morning, world. Meria here, alive and kicking. Today's show is going to be a little different. We're going to take a break from the psychotic news and this limited reality, and we're going to go into something that's more important. Let me tell you a little bit about my guest this morning. His name is Bruce Benefiel. He holds a master's degree in business administration and organizational management, a bachelor's degree in business administration, but he's also an author, a coach, a facilitator, a musician, an organizer, a producer, and a TV host. He's also somebody that has been in and out of my life serendipitously for the past 20 years. He's got several books out, but today we're going to be talking about his book called Zendor the Barbarian, Door to What Is, Battling Science and Spirituality to Find Identity and Truth. So without further ado, I want to say good morning to Bruce. Good morning, Bruce.
Good morning, Maria.
How are you?
I'm doing great, and even better now that I'm speaking with you.
You get a gold star for that one. Bruce, I must say it's kind of odd how you and I keep touching our energies every so often, and when you least expect it, there you are. So after reading your book, I now understand why that is.
Well, there's a lot of serendipitous synchronicity in this life, isn't there?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. The only difference is unlike you, I knew who my parents were. And also always questioned, why did I pick this crazy Italian family?
Sure. Being orphaned and adopted is it's an interesting way to enter life, and of course not being aware of that for several years. I didn't know any different, so I assumed that my parents were my parents. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until they thought that I would understand what the whole concept of adoption was that they informed me. And I'm guessing, kindergarten age.
Uh-huh. Well, it's kind of interesting because both my children were adopted, and it's a hard decision to figure out when to tell them. I mean, they were my children, but my husband had adopted them. And they did, and it was a matter of, my daughter was old enough to understand at the time, but my son was a baby. And, we really sweated over, when are we going to tell him? We have to tell him. We have to tell him before somebody else does.
Well, I'm sure as a parent, that is just it's a really trying kind of decision. And, you want to tell them, but when's it appropriate? When are they going to understand it? And hopefully, as a parent now, I've got 4 kids, none of them adopted, but as I got older, I could understand how my parents really went through the emotional trauma of,
trust me,
how do you tell them?
Right.
When do you tell them?
Right. Trust me, you have no idea what a big sweat that was for many years.
Sure, because you don't know how they're going to respond.
Right, but you also want them to be intelligent enough to understand it, and then you got to figure out what kind of words do you use to tell this kid,
Yeah, and I think every parent truly wants to be honest. Mm-hmm. They want to set that example to begin with their children, or at least I would think so. Maybe I'm incorrect in assuming that. But I think especially in situations when adoption is involved, that there's a certain amount of integrity involved in that process.
Right. Well, we ended up, we lived on the beach in New York, and my son was a Cancerian, so of course he loved the beach. He was probably 6 or 7 years old, and we decided we were going to pack up a picnic lunch and just take him to his favorite spot and tell him the truth right there by the beautiful Atlantic Ocean. And
perfect spot.
And I'll tell you what, my husband was so nervous, I can remember it like it was yesterday, and trust me, it was 30 years ago. And we sat him down, and before we had our lunch and whatnot, And my husband explained to him that before he was his father, I was married to somebody else who was his biological father, but that he chose to be his father. And there we were waiting for a response, looking at this big-eyed kid. And he just looked at us and he said, He says, so you're saying Mom had a husband before you and had a baby with him? Because my daughter was from a different dad. And he says, yeah. And he looked at me and he said, wow, Ma, you must have been hot. And then he asked if he could have a peanut butter sandwich, and then he went off into the ocean.
Sure, it didn't matter.
Right. But you know what? We sweated that moment for 7 years.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
I'll bet. And I'm sure I had a similar response initially because I'd grown up with them. I knew them. I loved them. I trusted them. I knew they loved me deeply because they showed it. But as in those quiet moments when you begin to think about what you've just been told, all kinds of questions come up.
Right. Exactly.
And it's hard to relate to a kid's consciousness and reflecting back on what one goes through at that time. Mm-hmm. But evidently, I went deep enough with it and the questioning that I really, I wanted to know more. I wanted to know, is there something else? If these weren't my biological parents, who might they be? Why did they give me up? Is there something beyond that? We were a Christian family, so Mom was singing in the choir, and I think at that time Dad did too. So I grew up in a Methodist environment, and I had those questions of who's my father, who's my mother, and are they just and I don't know how I framed this as a kid, but it seemed like there was more than just the for lack of a better terrestrial parentage.
Right.
And I remember one of the very first experiences I had that let me know that there was much more to this life than one might imagine.
Right.
I was on the landing of the stairway in our home, looking out the window that looked out over the front porch, and I could see the main street. I was waiting for Dad to come home. It was late in the evening. It was dark out. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, I hear this deep, bellowing voice that simply says, "Hey, you." Mm-hmm. And at that moment, I didn't know what to think. I knew I heard it.
Right. Did it freak you out?
And did it flip me out?
Yeah.
Honestly, it sort of did, but it didn't. I mean, my immediate response was I spun around and I asked my mom if she heard it. And I said, "Mom, no, did you hear that voice?" And she goes, "What voice?" "I didn't hear any voice." I said, "That voice. It says, 'Hey, you.'"
Right.
Whereas as a little kid with a high-pitched voice, I couldn't, emulate it as to how I actually heard it. But her response to me was, "No, I didn't hear anything. Must have been a peeping Tom."
So did you continue to try to convince her that it was something that you heard?
At that point, I didn't. I think I just felt deflated.
Uh-huh.
And I knew what I heard. I knew I heard it. And with her only being just a few feet away and not hearing it, it made me wonder because it was so loud.
Right.
But I also, I guess, understood that maybe she didn't hear it.
Right.
And at that point, I didn't know what else to think.
Mm-hmm. Well, yours called you, "Hey, you." I think I was 5 the first time I heard the voice, and actually he called me by name. And I turned around and I was like, "What?" And there was nothing there, but I knew, no sense telling anybody I just heard that. I don't know how I knew that, but I just knew it. No sense telling anybody.
Well, for me, it sure gives new meaning to, I answered a "Hey, you."
Right, well, that was my mother's favorite name to me. For many years, I thought my name was you. But she probably had too many kids to keep track of our names. Do you agree or disagree? I mean, I've always found and still believe that we all pick our parents, and we always find the right people to be in our lives for whatever lesson or challenge they're supposed to bring us.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. I think you can't help but not believe that if you truly believe in an intelligence that manages everything that we call God.
Mm-hmm.
And if everything's connected, then there's a certain stream, if you will, that we jump into. And as we come into this life, we have things that are set up for us. And I have to say, being given the name Benefiel, which actually means good fidelity, and I didn't understand or didn't know that until my early 20s. But, I mean, how better a name could one be given?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Well, even though I've been divorced for a very long time, I kept the name Heller because I had used it professionally for so long. And there's a lot of people that try to demonize me and call me, whether I'm a Zionist, this, that, Jew, German, Nazi, whatever. But the truth of the matter is the name Heller translated means bringer of light.
Wow.
And I remember telling my ex, I said, I'm keeping the name. I'd like you not to use it. I said, because I put the hell in Heller.
Right. Well, it kind of brings to mind the whole thing about Lucifer.
Right, but I think a lot of people don't even know what their own names mean. I mean, okay, in America, first names have no meaning like they do in other countries. But I don't think people really have ever even looked at the root meaning of their own name.
Well, our culture really doesn't teach that. It doesn't teach us to look at our ancestry, to look at how we became who we are, in whatever way that happens.
Right. And I don't think your name is an accident either. Right.
Other cultures in the world, but heck, we're a couple hundred years old or so we're thousands of years behind everyone else, realistically.
I know, but we still think we're ahead of everybody else. My maiden name was Rubino, and it translated into Little Rubies. And before he was done, my father had 6 little rubies. So when I hear that song Ruby, that old standard, I often think of my own name.
Sure, quite a gem.
Right.
Quite a gem.
Bruce, let's get into your book some, because first of all, I do want to tell you have a lot of parallel experiences in your book, although I think I missed out on some of the ugly stuff in your life, but I had ugly of my own.
Sure.
You talk about it right in the beginning, and I love the expression, planetary pioneers.
Well, I think those of us who really have the kinds of experiences when we're young, we don't forget those. There's something about who we are, what we experience, how we incorporate and integrate that no matter what kind of things we face in life, that's something that we can go back to.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I looked at that, I thought about, it's becoming obvious to me, and I'm just going to assume you've been keeping up with the news, at least on these whistleblowers coming forth. When I look at these whistleblowers, I think about what I was teaching spiritually, maybe 30, 35 years ago. And, of course, at that time, we were first getting familiar with the term indigo children.
Right.
And I knew at that point that we would have to keep the world intact long enough for these kids coming in to be able to turn legal age, 21. That once they hit that, then there'd be no stopping them. And I'm looking at these whistleblowers, 22 years old, 27 years old, 29 years old. And I think when I saw your wording in the book, Planetary Pioneers, our generation have been called the way showers. Okay, we had to come in and kind of pave the way for the younger generation, teach them, raise them, and keep them safe. And for many years...
organizational development, there are, we think of segments of society, the millennials, the Next generation, the baby boomers, and the traditionalists.
Right.
Well, one of the keys that the millennials are known for, which are the generation you're talking about, they don't care what the truth is. They just want to know it and share it.
Exactly. And they want to share it freely.
Right.
So, they have, you can see, I am so excited watching them come forth that I'm waiting for the rest of them to come forth.
Right.
But I remember back in the day, I don't know if you do, but I know you were in Scottsdale around the same time I was, where everybody was bragging and touting the Indigo Kids. They actually had, bring your kids to this Indigo group meeting if you think your child's an Indigo. And I warned parents not to tell anybody if you had an Indigo child, because I knew the government would find a way to grab that kid. So I think the New Age movement, which I find nothing new about, did them a tremendous disservice by pretty much putting a bullseye on their heads.
Well, that's possible. I haven't heard too much about any, abductions and things like that. Our educational system is atrocious. We're still back in the system that Dewey set up with his folks about, just coming out of the war and needing people to go into factories, take orders, don't question.
Right.
We've changed to some degree, because we've had to, but the systems are still pretty much intact to where we don't nurture the whole individual. We don't look at them as a being that has certain needs beyond just what we want to teach them in the classroom. Mm-hmm. They have an emotional side. They have a spiritual side. Mm-hmm. They have a physical side. All of these things, our educational system hasn't really addressed. Australia's come up with some things about holistic education, where they begin to look at the whole child. The Waldorf schools are another one. Mm-hmm. That do that type of thing. But by and large, we don't teach kids what is, we don't understand the natural rhythms and cycles, their circadian rhythms. We don't understand natural rhythms at all.
Right.
For the most part, because we try to circumvent them in order for us to create an environment that meets what we want it to be instead of what it is.
Right. Right, and then you have these kids and you put them in an archaic failure of a school system, and if they're not Robotron or zombied out, they will diagnose them as if there's something wrong with them and drug them to specifically shut down their imagination and spirituality.
When I was younger, they didn't, and I was gifted with a very high intellect and really didn't even know it. But school and schoolwork and things like that was really easy for me, and I got bored. So I was a little bit mischievous in the classroom.
Oh, really? I find that hard to believe. I was like a demon in the classroom because the classwork was so easy. But I also knew they couldn't do anything to me.
As I grew up, my mother was a teacher, so I had to behave.
Right.
Because, there was a certain expectation on me, and I fairly well did that, but I still hung out with all the different segments of society that were in our small town, from the hoodlums to the brainiacs.
Mm-hmm. As did I. I think I had a round trip pass to the dean's office. but they couldn't.
I remember sitting in my second grade class, and the teacher was out for the day, so the principal came in and took over the class. Her name was Marie Thurston. What a wonderful woman. But I was sitting in the front row, and evidently I was rolling my eyes. And she didn't care for that. And she said, "Mr. Benefiel, you roll your eyes one more time, and I'm going to show you the paddle." And I was like, "Cool, I get to see the paddle." So I rolled my eyes. And I didn't understand that she was going to do more than just show me the paddle.
Right. Well, luckily they didn't do that in the school I went to.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that children, especially, they hear things come out of our mouths and they take our words literally.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, they trust us, so they figure we mean what we're saying, but they don't understand how we mean it.
Right.
Now, you talk about in your book, you got a really good expression. You know, years ago, I learned a good one from my Native American friend down in Florida. He used to say, if your ego's not your amigo, get rid of it.
Right.
Okay. And when I looked in your book and you had that saying, no ego without we go, I like that too. What do you mean by that?
Well, first of all, I can't claim it. It came from a dear friend of mine that's now on the other side. He was actually written up in Time magazine as a prophet of his own time in March 1971. He was one of the people that was responsible for starting the waterbed industry. But he was really into, the deeper things of life, spirituality, neuroscience, trying to make sense of it all. But he had learned at one point that there really is no ego without we go. We're all in it together.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon, the sooner that we learn that, the better off we all are. There's cooperation, collaboration, community within that.
Do you think
inherently our country and we've kind of, as a first world nation, we've pushed our morals and ethics on the world, and that's been competition, which doesn't really allow much for collaboration beyond the team spirit.
Mm-hmm.
There's that initial, and we teach this in the schools with sports.
Mm-hmm.
And clubs and things like that.
Right.
The group cooperates and collaborates together, but it's still pitted against another group that's trying to outmaneuver them for whatever reason, whether it's debate or on the field or on the court.
Right, which I think is very unhealthy.
To a certain degree. I mean, I think we all need to know what we think, how we think it, why we think it, and to be able to stand for our own beliefs, our values, our morals, and our ethics, which is our behavior of how we manifest what we truly believe. But beyond that, there's a huge gap in our planetary pioneer efforts to learn how to work together as a global society or as planetary.
But do you think that right now, at the point in time we are in the human experience on this planet, that people are starting to wake up, starting to unite? Of course, the protests around the world, especially in Brazil, come to mind. Do you think there is a planetary awakening?
Absolutely. And we see that. The Occupy movement is a great example. That spread around the planet in a matter of weeks.
Uh-huh.
What it showed was that people were willing to stand up and say, hey, I don't like what's going on. It doesn't meet with what I think should be based on what we know.
Right.
But there was a lack of direction as far as, okay, what do we do with this now? But we've all agreed that we disagree with the status quo. So what do we do with that? How do we facilitate change in an appropriate way that doesn't create more conflict?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question. I will tell you, I was kind of taken back the first time I saw in your book the words, New World Order. We have to create a New World Order. I thought of Bush Sr. As soon as I read that, I was like, uh-oh, where's this book going?
Yeah, well...
I guess you didn't realize that term would...
that's one of those phrases. Mm-hmm. You really can't move beyond anything until you stir the pot and create the chaos.
Right.
The chaos then naturally moves to order if and when you understand the process and nurture it, and understanding that there are processes. One of the things you mentioned earlier about the awakening and people coming alive and sharing the truth and all of that, even the Mayan Calendar, some of the things that were mentioned in the cycles of time that it speaks to the cycle of ethics, which we just came out of, was one where everything that isn't in integrity with natural order is exposed.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're seeing a lot of the ramifications of that around the world now. And because of the Internet, we know about it nearly instantly, and it has also facilitated. I mean, here's this, Jewish kid facilitating an Islamic revolt.
Mm-hmm. I know we live in interesting times, that's for sure. I mean, yesterday I was posting away and I said, is it wrong for me to enjoy the news as much as I do? And then I said, nah.
No, well, it's all about change, and change, unfortunately, doesn't come until we get so uncomfortable with how things are.
Mm-hmm. Well, I totally agree, and I always often tell people that sometimes if you don't have something negative going on in your life, you're not moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
You got to say, well, what am I learning?
To channel that anger in a more influential direction that actually creates a transformation,
mm-hmm.
rather than just cycling the anger and continuing that conflict.
Right. Well, my teacher, Sunbear, said it pretty easy. He said, anger is a useless emotion unless you let it fuel your fire.
Right.
And I think a lot of people don't even know they have a fire. Okay, they haven't even stoked it. They haven't even stacked the wood yet. And that's something I want to talk about when we come back from break. Is, how do you know, what you're here to do? Is your life on track? Is it where you want to be? What's your mission? What's your purpose? So stay with us.
Bring up that phrase again.
Right. Stay with us. Bruce and I will be right back. Hi, this is Meria Heller, taking a break from my own show. I've been the producer and host of the Meria Heller Show for, since July of 2000. Other people claim to be the longest podcast on the net. I actually am. Or as Greg Pallas said, Maria's the inventor of internet radio. I'm not a member of any political party. I'm not a member of any religious group. I'm just a member of the human race, just like you, trying to survive and know the truth about what's really going on out there. So won't you please take the time while you're listening to this show to subscribe? Get over to Meria, MERIA.net, pick the subscription of your choice, make a donation, and sit back and listen to commercial-free talk from the best experts on the planet that only have you and me in mind. Because if you're going to trust your government to take care of you, that's going to be one of the biggest mistakes you've ever made in your life. So, again, thank you for subscribing, thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing the information with anyone who will listen. Again, back to the show. Okay, welcome back. I'm speaking with Bruce Benefiel. I'd like you to check out his website, BeTheDream.com. And, of course, we're talking about one of his books, Zendor the Barbarian. You're going to have to read the book to figure out that title. Bruce, before the break, people talk about it, and a lot of times when people come to me for, a private consultation, the thing they're interested most in is, am I living my life's path? Am I on my journey? What am I here to do?
Right.
Why do you think that's so confusing for so many people?
Well, there's several reasons, and most of them are because we try to fit in with how we think others want to receive us.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of this, it's almost a codependency that we have on meeting others' needs before our own. Now, one of the things that was unique about my experience and understanding that I was orphaned and adopted, it gave me this quest to know more about who I am, why I'm here, and what I'm to do. And when I was in college the first time at good old Ball State University, Dave Letterman's alma mater,
mm-hmm.
I came back from my first quarter break, and I was rather distraught because I had broken up with my high school girlfriend before I went to school so that I would maintain integrity, and realized that I really loved her and I wanted to marry her. So I went home on break to ask her to marry me.
Uh-huh.
I showed up at her parents' house, knocked on the door, asked if she was home, and her father says, "Didn't you hear?" And, of course, my heart just goes up into my throat, and I'm thinking, my God, did something happen?
Right.
And he says, "She got married."
Uh-huh.
So it just ripped my heart out. I went back to school and was pretty empty inside and felt like, okay, I need to find direction. So I got down on my knees, and I literally prayed the most fervent prayer I have ever made. And I said, "Father, I want to know what truth is, and I'm willing to die for it if necessary."
Mm-hmm.
And I meant every word.
Right.
And I came back a week later, and be careful what you ask for.
Right. Right.
I came back from class the following week. Now, I was in the pre-med program. I was, like I said before, I was kind of a brainiac, and I tested out of 6 quarters or 5 quarters going into school. But I came back from class, and my class test was on Sundays. I'd come back, and I'd put on an album, and I would just kick back and listen to music for a little bit just to chill out.
Right.
Well, the album that I put on this day was by a band called Journey. You might remember them. It was their very first album,
right.
1975, which was my first year in college. And during the second song, in between the vocals and the vamp, there was a guitar riff that sounded like a rocket ship taking off. And right before that, the voice that I had been familiar with since childhood, and I'd heard it several times before, said, "Bruce, are you willing to die for what you believe in?" And, of course, my first thought was, oh, shit.
All right. Oops, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Oops.
And so I realized, okay, I got to think. Jesus was a big part, but no, it's more about Christ consciousness. Now there's more. Cosmic consciousness. Yes. And as soon as I said yes, this guitar riff comes up, and I feel myself leave my body. I had multiple out-of-body experiences before that, so I was really comfortable with it. And so I just let go and left. And I turned around, and I looked at my body laying across my dorm room bed, turned back to look where I was going, and was immediately engulfed by white light. And it felt so pure. It was just amazing. And yet, as this impetuous teenager with a quick mind, I looked around and was like, okay, I can think. I realize I'm thinking. All I can see is light. I can't feel anything. Wow, is there more? And I felt a slight movement, and then all of a sudden I'm in this sphere of pinpoints of light with an indigo background, and I immediately recognize that these points of light are points of consciousness, whether in body or not. I'm not sure because I know I'm not. And the voice picks back up again, and this is where it gets really freaky. It says, "These are those that you are to work with in order to facilitate a new world order. It will happen in your lifetime. Know this to be true. Your path will be full of trials and tribulations. Have faith and trust that everything you need will be there at its appointed time. Trust and allow." And at the completion of that last word, I feel another rush of energy this time, and I'm back in my body taking a gulp of air. And I just laid there for a few moments, still kept my eyes closed. It felt like I was, brand new in my body. And I didn't know how to receive that. I mean, what do you do?
Right, you freak out. I would think I would freak out first, especially if you're young and you haven't had those experiences before. And then you say, oops.
I had plenty of odd experiences. I mean, as an 8-year-old, I would wake up in the corner of my bedroom, and I'd watch my physical body get out of bed, walk out across the neighbor's backyard, climb a fence, walk out into this 10-acre pasture, and rise up into an orange cigar-shaped cloud. And as I would enter my physical body would enter the cloud, my observer would meld with it, and I'd go into the cloud, and I'd wake up in bed the next morning. Couldn't wait to go back. Don't know what happened inside. Occasionally I'd wake up with nosebleeds. I never thought anything more about it than it was just a really cool experience.
Right.
And it wasn't until I was preparing to move out here that I was walking through a metaphysical bookstore in Muncie, and this book falls off the shelf in front of me. Nobody else around, and it's open on the floor, and I look at it, and it's Ruth Montgomery's Aliens Among Us.
Oh, I remember that book. I remember that book. That was one of the early ones. I read everything she ever wrote.
Yeah. So I pick the book up, I flip it over. Very first paragraph I'm drawn to, paraphrase, says, the most common UFO contactee experience in the Midwest in the late 50s, early 60s was the orange cigar-shaped cloud.
Right.
And it was like a domino effect for me at that point. Everything that I had experienced suddenly made sense in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember
Who are you
reading
gonna
her.
talk to? Who are you going to call?
Who are you going to call? Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
I know the feeling of being alone because you really feel alone. I mean, those are the kind of things you don't even share with your best friend or your siblings,
Well, I have a big mouth. So I shared it with a lot of people, including my parents.
Yeah, and it didn't really get you. It didn't get you too far.
Sorry?
Well, didn't you have to spend a couple of terms inside a mental institution because nobody believed you?
That was the following year from when I first had the experience. Initially, they sent me to a psychiatrist, and he listened intently. We had some really wonderful conversations. I mean, I couldn't have had any better listener, and he reflected from a place where I could tell he was really listening without judgment. And during the third session, he says, Bruce, you're not crazy. What you've described to me has all the classic signs of a spiritual awakening. He says, why so young? I don't understand, because most people don't go through it till their mid-40s, if they ever do.
Right.
Of course, as a teenager, I didn't understand what that meant until I was in my mid-40s and watching all my friends go through it. And then I got it.
Right.
Because, they're empty nesters at that point. So they're looking for something, the next fulfilling thing in their lives.
Right. Well, you talked about
them into, okay, what am I here for?
Right.
If you didn't address that question when you were younger,
right,
then
do you think everybody's here? Do you think everybody's here for a mission or a purpose?
I think potentially we are. I think the ultimate, and I'm probably going to get massive disagreement with this, but I think the ultimate is that we're to recognize that we are celestial consciousness, for lack of a better, that has condensed into these forms we call bodies. And we're evolving to understand the nature of consciousness.
I like that. I don't have a problem with it. It's almost, everybody uses different terms to express
it. And I have to admit, it really is a stretch. But now we have science beginning to edify that process with quantum mechanics, multiple dimensions. William Swigert had a great process that he developed back in the 1950s called multiplane awareness. And it's basically, it's like a hypnotherapy session that takes people through various planes of consciousness that each have a body on them. And it's kind of, if you look at it like a rainbow, there's various layers of vibration that don't necessarily, the colors don't have one color. Of course, you can like it's all colors, but in between there are those layers, the segues in between one color to the next color. Well, when you consider the levels of consciousness, I mean, for crying out loud, we have 5 senses and 10% of our brain use. Do the math. You got 45 more with the other 90%.
Right.
Just with that simple example.
Right.
And I realize that's oversimplification.
Right, but I understand what you're saying. I mean, to me, I think my other 90% is busy all the time. Or as one of my friends called it, there's always a party going on inside your head.
Oh, absolutely. The first time I went through the multiplane awareness technique, there was a party in my room for a couple of weeks during the night. I would wake up to all these different sounds and voices and tones and music, and I couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. I thought I was going nuts.
Well, what about the fact that you think because you're experiencing that everybody else is too? I mean, I used to think that everybody could tell what I was able to see around people, and then I found out, no, they couldn't.
Right. Growing up, all my experiences, I thought they were so natural that everybody must have them.
Right. Then you realize everybody's calling you a heretic and crazy and demon-possessed, and you need an exorcist. And you say, this can't be good.
My light experience in an evangelical church here in Phoenix, thinking that they would understand it in an adult Sunday school class.
Right.
The following day, 3 of them showed up after I left for work, and they told my wife that I was full of Satan and that she needed to leave me as soon as possible.
Oh, my God. I know. I was reading your accounts, and I was like, wow, better him than me. I thought I had it bad.
I wouldn't wish that on anybody, and yet...
But you know what? That's what makes us...
I made the commitment to give up my life to know truth.
Right.
And it was a mandate. I have to go through this. I don't have a choice.
Hey, we were taught the truth will set you free.
The only choice is that I have to be true to myself and my own convictions.
Exactly.
And keep moving forward.
Now, you talk about in your book, and I totally get it. You have a good way with words to explain something really deep in so simple words. But I'd like to hear how you explain it. You call it knowing without understanding.
Well, that's about as simple as it gets, isn't it?
I think so.
There's that sense that we have that, it's like you walk into a room, okay, and you catch the eye of someone, and you know that they're familiar. You don't understand why.
All right.
But there's this sense within you that's beyond your understanding, and yet it's there, and it's undeniable. Most of us tend to just blow it off and pass right by it because we don't have that nurturing from others around us to take it to the next step, to find out more.
Right.
Why am I sensing this? Why am I feeling this? And to ask the questions. And I found that in my own life that by asking those questions, it really puts people on the spot.
Oh, yeah, it makes them very uncomfortable. I mean, for me, there's a lot of things that I know, but I certainly can't explain. And a lot of times maybe I'm in session with somebody or having a conversation, and they want an answer to a question, and I have to tell them some questions have no answers. And I don't know that they understand that.
Well, they maybe have no answers in that moment. The fact that they have asked the question means there is an answer. And the answer is usually within the question, and it's something that they've already, for lack of a better, metacognated.
Well, I understand what you're saying because I used to teach that too, that you can't ask a question without knowing the answer. But the truth of the matter is, in our limited physical bodies and our limited maybe 10% of our brain, I think it's more like 7%, there are things that we cannot get an answer to because we're not equipped to tap into that dimension or that reality to get the answer. So you're going to have to be okay with it.
Technique and things like that come into play.
Right.
Where it allows us the freedom. And of course, it depends on the constructs and the constrictions that we put in place as far as how we allow ourselves to experience. If we don't admit that there are other possibilities or that, we don't know everything and that there are things that are beyond our scope of understanding that we can still experience, then we limit our experience here. And most of us don't have our experience outside what we've learned.
Right,
Whether
exactly.
It's church or school or, from our parents or whatever. We place those limitations on ourselves.
Right.
And, some of the conversations I have with people who are Christian by nature, and they're getting all their information out of the Bible, let's say. I distinctly remembered Jesus saying something about the word is in your heart. Go there.
Right.
And that's not in the book.
No, of course not. Go within. They let that out.
Just to go to that place, and they start, flipping through the book, trying to find the references, and for crying out loud, this thing has been translated so many times.
Right. Well, and then a lot of people just believe it. They haven't even read it. It's kind of like the Patriot Act, okay. They might as well just have a Bible and say, I agree, because they don't even know what's in it. But, recently, I would say the past year or two, David Icke's been talking about that I'm an experience. I'm here. I'm a spiritual being having an experience here. And
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, and you call it, I like the way you put it, too, experience systems versus belief systems.
Right. What do we base things on? We base our reality on what we know, what we've experienced in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not taught to test the beliefs, yet
right.
Even in that book it says test the spirits, and then test everything.
Uh-huh.
Because if we don't, the truth can't emerge.
Exactly. But if you think of yourself as just a powerful spiritual being having an experience here, experiencing, it really is different than saying, I believe this, because most of our beliefs are passed down by other people anyway.
I wouldn't even think of myself as a powerful spiritual being. I would just say, something that we're open, that we're more than what we think. We are spirit and matter combined. Mm-hmm. We have that physicality in the proton, electron, and neutron, which is the natural occurrence of what the Trinity represents. And in the space in between those points of matter is the consciousness that directs it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
This is what quantum mechanics is getting into now. They're recognizing that there is something more in that space between the dots, if you will.
Right, or as I've been calling it for years, the space in between things.
Right.
People think that space is all empty.
Yeah. One of the things that really stuck with me was learning how to play the space between the notes.
Well, you've obviously been dancing out between the notes for a long time. I would think you're more experienced than Jimi Hendrix was.
Oh, it brings to mind that actually one of my experiences with another, we were talking about telepathy and the limitations of it. Really, there are none. But as we were in my dorm room experiencing, we were looking into each other's eyes from across the room, and his eyes remained, but his body disappeared. Mm. And I saw Janis Joplin, Lenny Bruce, Marilyn Monroe, Jimi Hendrix, and Lenny Bruce. It just, boom.
Wow, you actually went to rock and roll heaven for a little tidbit.
And, then they faded out. His body returned. His eyes shifted, and I could tell that he had gone someplace that he didn't really know.
Right.
He wasn't really freaking out, but he knew that he had left for a moment.
Well, you can always tell when you've been gone for a little while.
Yeah.
And then you say, uh-oh, where was I?
Right.
Bruce, you talk about in your book, and I think it's something important. I wanted to get it in before we run out of time.
Sure. 2012,
okay? You reference 2012 as the midpoint of a 50-year cycle.
Right.
Cycle of what?
In 1987 with the harmonic convergence. And Jose Arguelles gets into this deeper, and even Tom Major Jenkins and Kalaman and Lungold and all those guys understand this, that in the Mayan calendar there's this segue, and you can look at it as a segue from the Piscean to the Aquarian age, if you want to put it in Western terms.
Right.
But the doorway opened. There was 25 years where like in a moon cycle, okay, there's the waxing of the moon. So there's the waxing of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And there's this building of steam, if you will, and momentum toward looking for more, towards understanding, towards this internal, innate understanding that each of us truly have, that everything's connected. And all of this comes to an apex where now that we understand this, theoretically, we have reached that tipping point to where this knowledge now is ubiquitous. It's available anywhere, everywhere, and especially through the internet.
Right.
Now that we've reached that tipping point, our job is to implement that, which is the waning.
Right.
So now we have this understanding, okay, what are we going to do with it? Because knowledge without action is
a waste.
Exactly.
It's what it is. It's a waste. You know, Sunbury used to say, taking in knowledge for the sake of knowledge is a waste of time. He said, knowledge only becomes wisdom when you share it.
Right. So we've got this 25-year window now that is just as important as the building of the consciousness. Now we have to implement it. And, you know, a lot of the things that came out in the 90s, Peter Senge, let's say, with his learning organization, The Fifth Discipline, his book that talks about personal mastery and the learning organization that is constantly evolving, and it's getting better and better. Now we have something else that just came out in 2010 called the ISO 26000 Social Responsibility Standards that were developed by 90 representatives from 90 different countries. It's a document. It's pretty lengthy. It may not be the best thing, but it's something.
Right. It's a place to start.
A group of 90 countries came together to agree on, and to show that this is something that, and it's all intentional. You know, the ISO, the International Standards Organization, we know them as for the 9000 series, which is an international standard for manufacturing.
Right. You know, I don't remember, Bruce, because it's been so long. But did you ever, in the day, did you ever attend any of my public medicine wheels when I was doing those in Scottsdale?
You know, I
know it's hard to remember. I mean, I had so many people from everywhere show up. It's hard to remember them. But, you know, the medicine wheel has always been about teaching that everything is connected.
Absolutely.
You know, and, you know, it really is time for people to understand that, you know, and for me, sometimes, like, I don't know about you, but sometimes I get frustrated and I'm like, how much harder do I have to work to get through to people? You know, it's like, God, I've been doing this for so long.
Well, I think at that time you scared me.
Oh, I hear that from a lot of people.
Remember we had the conversation because you were straight from New York, and I was, you know, just out of a divorce and corporate expulsion, and so I was really rather diminutive at the time, and you were intimidating to me. And
I hear that a lot. I don't know why.
Yeah, you're not now. I mean, you know, but I was emotionally weak at that time, and because I just had my world ripped out from underneath me.
Well, who knew?
But I think one of the where we met was at Louis Russo's, and I was trying to remember if you were at the very first time that I did my little stand-up routine, that I have a three-piece suit on that I gradually take off with another set of clothes on underneath it. I know Ariel Wolf, Doris Guyan, you know, she just changed her name, and she was sitting in the back of the room and rolling pennies up. And everybody, you know, was doing the striptease thing, little, you know, musical clip in between. And it really made it easier for me. But what I was doing was, again, trying to stand up, speak my truth, do it in a way that was fun, that I could share, you know, the turmoil, the trauma, and the trials and tribulations.
So you're talking about Russo's stand-up comedy classes?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I took that with my son. I was really hoping I could do stand-up comedy, and then the voice said, "No, Maria, you're having too much fun. Guess what? You're going to start delivering the news. You're going to do radio." I'm like, "What? Never wanted to do radio." I was like, "What?" They always stop my
fun. What I'm going to do when I grow up.
Right. I'm like, "What? Maybe when I'm 90 I can get to do that." But sometimes I feel like I think I'm doing comedy anyway. Anyhow, Bruce.
Humor is one of the greatest aspects
Absolutely.
of our personality and character that we can maintain. Everything is sacred, yet nothing is sacred.
Absolutely, I agree totally.
At the most traumatic situations.
Right. I totally agree. I mean, like I said earlier, is it wrong of me to enjoy the news so much?
Right.
But I know I'm looking at it from way different eyes than most people. Bruce, I want to thank you for joining me today. This was a very pleasurable, super fast hour. And absolutely stay in touch with me.
I will, dear. And thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure to reconnect. And,
absolutely.
By all means.
All right. Well,
visit the website. I've got more books and CDs and meditations there at BeTheDream.com.
BeTheDream.com. Thanks so much, Bruce. Take good care.
Always. You too.
You too. Bye-bye. Bruce Benefiel. Sometimes, wow. People remember parts of my life that I almost forgot. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's show as a nice little break to remember you. I hyphenate that word, remember who you are and what we're here to do. And like a drunk one said on a cruise that was going down, we're not here for a long time. We're here for a good time. So don't let the false reality around us petrify you so much that you forget to enjoy your life. Tomorrow, Blood and Guts with myself and Jack Blood. I'll see you guys then.